As I walked into my room on the 7th floor of the Westin Hotel in Nashville, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, I gasped, terrified that if I got too close to the edge, I might try and jump.
Welcome to the Rhythm Restoration Podcast, the show rooted in scripture and scientific research, where you will learn to achieve maximum success in your business and personal life by actually working less hours. You will conquer burnout, find your purpose, restore your passion, and be more productive than ever. If you think it's too good to be true, it's not. It's exactly how God designed our bodies. And the science of our rhythms has actually been around for over 7 decades. But no one has ever looked at it through a biblical lens until now. Hi, I'm your host, Liz Bagwell, a published scientist turned healthcare executive, wife and mom of 3, who burned out at the top and found my purpose at rock bottom. Follow along with me as I leave everything behind in pursuit of helping others restore God's design for their personal lives and businesses. This will be raw, the good, the bad, and the ugly of what it's like when you stop running and start living in pursuit of what truly matters. Together, you'll cultivate a more balanced, joy-filled life, gaining the peace and freedom only found when leaning into God's design for your mind, body, heart, and soul.
As I walked into my room on the 7th floor of the Westin Hotel in Nashville, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, I gasped, terrified that if I got too close to the edge, I might try and jump. I sat my bags down on the bed and slowly walked towards the windows, each step causing me to tremble more and more. I had just checked into the hotel for a work conference following a long-awaited appointment with my psychiatrist. It was the week both Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain took their lives. I realized I was in big trouble earlier that week as I watched the media reports, and all I could think was, they no longer have to feel this. Instead of, oh my, how sad and tragic. The months leading up to this day were some of my toughest mentally on my life, yet they should have been my happiest. Thankfully, it was also the day I started reading Brené Brown's The Gifts of Imperfection. As I took each step closer to the floor-to-ceiling windows, something Brené wrote stuck out in my mind. To sum it up, sitting with your vulnerability and not running from it was necessary to heal. I took another step and sat on the couch, positioned in front of the windows. I took a deep breath, looked to the beautiful West Nashville sky as the sun began to set, and I closed my eyes. In that moment, I decided I would no longer run from my vulnerability. Instead, I would sit in it and allow myself to be completely vulnerable in order to heal. I got up from the couch and walked over to the desk where I had set my prescription bag with my antidepressant, just prescribed by my psychiatrist, and I took my first dose. I knew I needed a formula to restore my mind. And God, Prozac, and Brené Brown was where I began. Welcome to the Rhythm Restoration Podcast. This is episode 5, Restoration of the Mind, Part 2, my personal journey. The goal of today's episode is to bring even an ounce of hope to anyone in a dark season, as well as to help remove stigma around mental health, mental illness, and Christianity. To accomplish that, though, it means I must share the parts of myself, like I just did, that I would much rather be shoved away deep in a closet somewhere. But that goes against what God is calling me to do. He said, I wrote your story. Now go tell it. So tell it I will do. If you were doing the math in your head, you may have just realized that what I shared was pre-2020. And you were right. I wrote this as an opening to my memoir, which, by the way, I didn't get much further writing because, well, life. But do you have any idea the estimated number of individuals who considered taking their own lives recently? The latest numbers are around 12.3 million Americans considered taking their lives back in 2021. Let that sink in. 12.3 million. I want to take a moment to hopefully remove stigma also around suicidal thoughts, because I understand the vast majority of people listening likely cannot even fathom how you get there or what they are. But maybe you may know one of those 12.3 million people, or maybe you will one day, and this information could be very helpful. In my personal case, these were what are referred to as intrusive thoughts, meaning they were just there. I did not wake up and say, hey, I want to think about harming myself today, or I really don't like myself or my life. I loved my life. These were completely involuntary thoughts. If anyone either talks about this with you or you hear of someone going through this, please, please, please give them grace. I'm going to link in the show notes an amazing podcast that my life coach did with a guest speaker on how you speak with individuals who may be suicidal. Please, please check it out. What caused me to get to a place like that? To understand the whole picture, we must go all the way back to 2005. Now, there are only a handful of days in my 36 years where big, bold, brave actions I took resulted in trajectory changes in my life. Back in episode 1, you heard that March of 2020 was one of those. But the very, very first one took place sometime in the fall of 2005 during my freshman year at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. When I left Chattanooga, my hometown, for Knoxville in August of 2005, I loaded up my black 1997 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo all by myself. It was the day I had waited for nearly my entire life. The day I would escape hell, or so I thought. My parents did not want me to go away to school. I had been working since I was in 8th grade to keep the lights on and food on our table, paying bills whenever I could, working multiple jobs, sometimes splitting them with my sister. And me leaving to go to college meant I wasn't there to do that for them. And to give you a picture of what this was like, a couple years before this, and this was not even the worst thing that ever happened to me by far, but while we're on the topic of bills, I received a note. Actually, it started over the intercom. I got an announcement during my high school lunch period. Liz Morrow was my maiden name. Please proceed to the front office. There's a message waiting for you. Terrified, I go up, I get the message. It says, please call your mother. I step into a classroom. I call my mom, and she just starts calling me every name in the book, all of these awful things, and yelling and screaming at the top of her lungs. And it was all because I had forgotten to pay a Comcast bill, and she wanted to sit there and watch TV. I was like 15, 16. It was awful. Now back to that day. I remember looking around, waiting to see if anyone would come out and tell me goodbye. Regardless of all the things that had happened in my life, they were still my family, and I desperately wanted that moment. Everyone else had that moment. Why didn't I get that moment? I wanted people to wave at me as I drove off. I knew they were angry at me for leaving. I also knew, though, that if I was ever going to make it out alive and live anything that even resembled a normal life, I had to go. So with tears rolling down my face, disappointed that no one was coming out to hug me goodbye, I opened my trunk one last time to make sure it looked like I had everything. A set of monogrammed towels with my initials grabbed my attention. I smiled. My sweet friend Robin, that I'd worked with in high school during this time, gave me those as a going away gift to college. I then realized as I looked around, the entire back was full of things that I had gotten from people who were individuals God placed on my life and used them to get me to this exact moment. So with a grateful heart and a smile on my face, I shut the trunk and I drove away to college. Now, one thing I have found about myself that is absolutely true. I'm a total rock star in the middle of chaos. And I've actually been told this. While I'm in the ring going up against even the most life-threatening circumstances, I am so even-keeled, clear-headed, and determined. But as soon as the seas calm or I get out of the ring, my coping mechanism, armor, and gloves come off, and I tend to fall apart. That is what happened when I arrived in Knoxville. I naively thought all I had to do was get out of town, away from my family, and suddenly all my problems would be solved. Well, not so much. Shortly after arriving in Knoxville, I could feel myself coming apart. My OCD was out of control. My obsession with my grades was keeping me up at night, and my panic attacks were never ending. I remember looking up where the college counseling center on campus was and literally saying out loud, "Are you kidding me?" It was directly in front of the Hodges Library, the main library at the time, where most of the students entered on the ground floor. So in order to get to the counseling center, I had to walk in front of all of them. I don't recall my first session, or honestly, most of them, as I believe my mind suppressed those. But I do remember that they sent me to a psychiatrist as well for medication. During my time at UT, I saw tons of different counselors during those years because they were all trying to get their hours for their master's degree and they would rotate. But I did get to keep my psychiatrist for all 5 years. Early on, she diagnosed me with the following: major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, ADHD, and OCD, many of which I still carry with me to this day. Slowly, the hard work of consistent cognitive therapy at UT's Counseling Center and the right concoction of medications began to pay off. My symptoms no longer held a vice on my everyday. My thoughts were more clear, my sleep was much better, and it began to feel like I could actually live a very normal life in spite of all I've been through. So how did I go from where I was in college to having those awful intrusive thoughts in that 7th floor Westin hotel room 9 years later? And how did I get from a place of healing in late 2018 to having to go out on medical leave in 2020? Let's take a look at the similarities. Both times, I was living well outside my God-given rhythm, neglecting to take care of myself for the sake of my career. I ate poorly. I slept poorly. I'd work 12, 14-hour days with little breaks. Both times, I neglected the very resources that God created himself to help me all those years before. And both times, I stopped taking my medications and I stopped going to therapy. Let's take these similarities a step further and discuss 3 different important points that, regardless of where you are in the spectrum of a stressful mind today, this knowledge can one day be used as a tool in your toolkit or wisdom you share with someone else during a dark season of their life. First point, we must do what we can to minimize the stress in our lives. Do you remember in the last episode what I said happens when we are in prolonged periods of stress? Our DNA can change. So taking steps today to remove unnecessary stress from your life and minimize the damage to your body with all that extra cortisol and potentially more permanent changes to your DNA. This next thing is going to sting just a little bit, but what do we pass down to our children, biologically speaking? Our DNA. When we have trauma or prolonged stress and we pass that changed DNA down to our children, it's called generational trauma, which means if we are parents who have lived a life of trauma or prolonged stress, we must make an extra effort to be cognizant of this. And when our children go through stressful situations in adolescence or even adulthood or trauma themselves, please remember not to brush it off and consider taking them to see a therapist as soon as possible. This also means if your parents lived a life of trauma or prolonged stress, there may be things about you that just don't make sense, even if you've lived a rather easy life. If you fall into this category, everyday stress may seem like it doesn't affect everyone the same, and maybe it affects you on a different level, and this could be why. But I feel like knowledge is power. And so just knowing this can be a relief, and then acting on that knowledge and either seeing a therapist or evaluating your life and removing additional unnecessary stress is important to your overall well-being and longevity. Point number 2, if stress is overwhelming your life right now, stop thinking you can overcome it with willpower, or worse, ignoring it and thinking the harder you work or the more money you make, the better and the easier things will get. Because I'm here to tell you, they won't. When you have excess cortisol pulsing through your veins, and for some of us, a ton of changes to your DNA, You have to remove unnecessary stressors and use the resources God created for you, like therapists, psychiatrists, physicians, even medication, like in my case. Okay, point 3. In combination with points 1 and 2, living within your God-given rhythm can be that final step that takes your mind from a place of surviving and living for the weekend or even your next vacation to absolutely thriving, even on a Tuesday or a Monday. God never meant for you to live stressed out and miserable. He planned for you to live such a joy-filled life, full of purpose and passion. If He can take me from that 7th floor Westin hotel room to where I am today, He absolutely can take you from where you are and get you to a life more amazing than you can ever dream possible. But for God to do the supernatural, you must do the natural by doing your part to restore your mind. I'm here to help you, and so are many others. If my story resonated with you and you'd like to talk further or even consider me as your life consultant, don't ever hesitate to reach out. My email is rhythmrestorationco, that's C-O, @gmail.com. And my Instagram handle is @LizBagwell7, both of which are in the show notes. Please reach out. I'd love to hear what you thought of this episode. I've also linked in the show notes psychologytoday.com. Again, that's the website for anyone who needs this themselves or would like to pass it along. In the next episode, we will conclude restoration of the mind with my very own therapist, Dr. Barbie Hessel, who will share with us amazing, practical, and effective ways to restore our minds, including all the ones she and I use to restore mine.
Did you know that one of the biggest secrets to come out recently, and it's really not even just a secret, it's a true biohack to living a longer life, and this is scientifically proven, because otherwise I would not be saying it, is human connection, that true human connection that we all long for. So let's really connect, and I mean it. I cannot wait to go on this journey with you and help discover and restore your individual rhythm and life. You can find me on Instagram @LizBagwell7 or head on over to my website, rhythmrestoration.co, that's .co, not .com, where I share all things life, family, other biohacks, and simple ways to lean into God's true design for your life. It would mean the world to me if you could share this episode with a friend, family member, or coworker, or all three, and if you left me a review on your favorite podcast app. Thank you truly from the bottom of my heart for listening to the Rhythm Restoration Podcast. All my light and love, Liz.